Hi, everyone. This is Heather Hodges. I'm an organizational psychologist. Welcome to my show. This is the place where we say I'm in to creativity, bold thinking, transformational growth, and meaningful conversations. Today's guest is a leading voice in her field, and I recently had the privilege of meeting her at the National Speakers Association's Thrive Conference in Orlando. Dr. Amy Climer teaches teams and organizations how to increase their creativity so they can maximize innovation. She works with forward-thinking organizations such as the Mayo Clinic, Stanford University, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Amy is the author of the best-selling book, Deliberate Creative Teams: How to Lead for Innovative Results. She is also host of the Deliberate Creative podcast, where she shares practical advice and strategies to help leaders build innovative teams. Amy has a PhD in leadership and change, and she is a certified speaking professional. Very impressive. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
Well, I have to tell you the story of how I stumbled upon you and your work. It's been several years ago now when I first started researching creativity myself. And I was just hungry for podcasts that were grounded in research, but also inspiring and fun. And on one particular day, I was having a down day and I needed a creativity pep talk. So I typed into Apple Podcasts, creativity pep talk, and guess what popped up? Your podcast with that exact same title. I can't remember what episode it was, what year it was, but it was, Dr. Amy Climer, Creativity Pep Talk. And that's how I found you. And from then I have followed you for years. And so I just want to tell you thank you for your work and thank you for your podcast. Thank you for writing the Deliberate Creative. You have been inspirational to me for years, and we just met, and I didn't even connect with you on LinkedIn until recently. So thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you. I love that story. You know, it's funny. I remember that episode. I mean, it's been several years now, but at the time, an assistant I had is the one who told me, she's like, Amy, you should do an episode on a creativity pep talk. And I was like, really? You think people would want that? She's like, yeah, they would. I was like, okay, so I did it. And that is so fun to hear that it was helpful for you. Yeah. That's awesome.
It was. And I'm a painter, so I'm an artist. And it was one of those days where I'm staring at a blank canvas and nothing was coming. I'm like, gosh, I just need a pep, I need a little pep talk. Even though I consider myself creative, we have, cycles and ups and downs and days where you just don't feel like you've got it. And sometimes having another voice in your ear saying, it's okay, you've got this. Here's how you get off high center. Here's how you get unstuck and keep going. And so thank you for your work. So
well, thank you. I appreciate hearing that.
Well, I'm curious. First of all, how did you get into this work, and what prompted you to write this book? I mean, why now? Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. I think, the story of getting into the work of creativity has been it's been a bit of a long, rambling journey. Mm-hmm. Even as far back as high school, I was very curious about creativity. And I remember, kind of paying attention, and I was the person that if we were friends in high school and you had said you weren't creative, I was like, oh, no, you are creative. And I would have just, gotten all over you, tried to convince you and motivate you. And then I kind of had a little slump in college. Mm-hmm. And then after college, I stumbled upon a very well-known book, The Artist's Way. Mm-hmm. You've probably read it. Yeah. And that really made me start thinking about creativity differently. And then eventually I just started teaching it just in these fun, light settings. And I was noticing what works and what doesn't and what people need and what they're struggling with. And I actually tried to do my master's thesis on creativity, and my advisor was not having it.
Really?
It was the field was outdoor education, and it just didn't really quite fit. I think he didn't really get it, and maybe the study was just too complicated. Yeah. But anyway, I finally went back to get my PhD so that I could really get into it. But I think what I found, especially, I started my consulting practice in 2009. I think what I found with that is, I guess, two things. One, how important it is in the workforce, whatever field, but definitely in healthcare, but also how few people really have confidence of their own creativity or even an understanding of how it works. And that has kind of become my mission, is I want to help people understand how creativity works so that they can be more innovative. And particularly in that team setting. Early in my career, I did a lot of team development, team building kind of things. And so now I'm sort of melding those two things together, the creativity and the team building. And I'm seeing really positive results, which we can get into.
Yeah. Well, let's start at the beginning. Because as you said, a lot of people don't understand creativity. So can you define it for us? What exactly is creativity? And this is a two-part question. So what is creativity? And then what's the difference between creativity and innovation? Because I think a lot of people conflate those two concepts.
Yeah. So creativity, there's many definitions out there, but it kind of all boils down to this phrase: creativity is novelty that is valuable. And I love that definition. It's just short and sweet. And just to break it down a little bit, so novelty meaning unique, original, different, new, and then valuable could be financially valuable. It could be, particularly in healthcare, it might be, well, this is valuable because it saved someone's life, or this is valuable because it helped this person get through something, survive. It could just be aesthetically valuable. There's all these different layers to what valuable could mean. And I do think there's a myth around creativity, or I don't know if it's a myth or if it's just a difference of opinion. Some people think of creativity as just idea generation and that innovation is the implementation. And I don't see it that way at all.
Okay.
Because I think creativity, like ideas alone, honestly, I feel like they're almost worthless. It's really what we do with those ideas. That's what we don't like look back at history and think, oh, this person was really creative because they sat around a chair all day and thought of ideas. No, like we don't even know that happened, right? It's the output that really is the measure that we look at. So the definition of innovation, if you look at the research, and you probably know this, Heather, but if you look at the research, the definitions are nearly identical. And one difference is that innovation is often considered creativity with economic gain. And so we're looking at like the financial aspect. And I think if we just pay attention to our own language, we see how this comes out. So for instance, when we're talking about artists or writers, we might say, oh, they're really creative. But then but again, we're talking about their end product, right? Their book, their paintings, whatever it is. But then when we're talking about something in the technology space or business, even healthcare, we might say, oh, that person's really innovative. Or but again, we're talking about the product, what they did. But if we really break it down, those two people in those different fields, they're more or less following the same process.
Right.
And that's what I really dig into is the process.
And that's what you train on, isn't it? Like, and that's what you're leading to and unpack here in your new book. Wow. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So why does creativity matter? So why do we need creativity in organizations today? And what do you think organizations get wrong about creativity?
Okay, so I think why it matters is, I guess, twofold. One is it is just who we are as humans. Like it is so deep in our DNA that we actually can barely help ourselves. You think about healthcare alone, just that one field.
Yeah.
Everything in that field is because someone came up with it. Right? I mean, even understanding the natural processes that our human body does, like someone had to figure that out. Someone had to figure out, oh, well, maybe we take some vitamins that might help us. Or someone had to figure out how CPR works, right? Like this is just what we do. And I think that as humans, we have this really strong drive to improve things and create and make things better. And thank goodness, because I think if we didn't, we wouldn't have the civilizations that we have. We wouldn't have these great things. We certainly wouldn't be having this podcast conversation, right?
Yeah.
And I guess specifically in healthcare, the value of innovation is that it saves lives and it makes lives better. What was the next part of the question?
Yeah. What do you think organizations get wrong? This is why I shouldn't stack questions right there.
Okay.
But what do you think organizations get wrong about creativity? What are they missing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing they get wrong is they don't understand that it's a process. And they think that their employees, coworkers, whatever, are just going to come up with ideas and then I don't even know. Like, we're going to put it in the suggestion box and then it's just going to hatch or something. It's like put it in an incubator.
Yeah.
Right.
Ta-da!
That would be amazing. Now that would be a good invention someone in healthcare could come up with, right? Yeah. But being innovative is a process and it requires us. In fact, this is why the motto that I basically live by is be deliberate to be creative. Because it will not happen by accident. And that is the biggest mistake, is that leaders and teams and individuals think that, oh yeah, I'm just going to get this great idea and then it's going to happen. And it's way more specific than that. And we have a lot of myths that we perpetuate in our field, in our culture, that makes it look like someone had this great idea and then boom, it came to fruition. And we don't talk through all the steps that got there. And so I think that's one of the things that leaders miss. I will say one other thing I think leaders miss is that doing this takes time and effort and energy, right? But in order to do this, you got to let go of something else. And right now, I think we're in this era where a lot of people are burned out. They're tired. They can't even fathom being more creative or trying to produce something more. And so I encourage leaders, just take a little audit of what you've got going on. And my guess is there's something you're doing or that your team is doing that isn't really bringing in results that you think it is. And if you can let that go, you can free up some space for innovation.
Yeah, because the environment, as you write about, the environment has to be right for creativity, and we'll get to that here in a minute. I'm so glad I work a lot. 90% of my work is in the healthcare field, and creativity is almost a four-letter word. It's in healthcare. When if I'm talking with executives and I'm asking them, tell me about your creative process, it's almost like I have offended them by using the word creativity, because they want to jump from creativity to innovation, to that implementation or the action that we take, and they miss that brilliant process that you've talked about. So
yeah, I see that a lot as well. I was having a conversation with someone maybe 6 months ago, and we were talking about this idea of, setting aside time to generate ideas. And she just had this look on her face. Her mind was blown. And she said, oh my gosh, every time in our team, when we go to talk about ideas, we always go with the first idea that's said. And I was like, wait, what? You never she's like, it never occurred to us to get a second or third or 10th idea. And so I'm like, okay, usually the first idea is not always the best one.
No, it's
really not the most creative.
Down in there, it's deeper, it's the 10th or 20th or 50th idea.
Right.
That's the nugget. That's gold. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So what do you say when someone says to you, because I've heard this too, I'm not creative?
Well, usually I ask more questions. Why do you think that? And the most common response is because I can't draw.
So there's such a creativity with art.
Exactly, right? And so I'm like, well, good news. Creativity has nothing to do with your ability to draw. Have you ever been able to, take an idea through to implementation? And, usually they're like, oh, yeah, I've done that a lot. And then I was like, yeah, That's all it is. That's what creativity is going from, I've got a problem and I've solved the problem in a new way. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
Novel
when
and
people,
valuable.
yeah, exactly. Like when people understand what it is, they can start to see, oh, I've done that before.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay, great. What then do you think gets in the way of creativity? What are the barriers to creativity? Why is it so hard?
I think, yeah, there's a few layers. I think one of it can certainly be mindset. And that there is, it can be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you believe you're creative, you will be more creative. So that, in essence, could be a relatively easy shift. I mean, not that mindset shift is always easy, but that if you can start thinking of yourself as being more creative or noticing moments where you might have done something creative, then that can help. And so that's a piece of it. I think another barrier is we don't understand how it works. Well, I shouldn't say we, I actually understand how it works, but that teams and leaders don't understand how it works. And then they unknowingly do things that end up impeding creativity just by mistake. For instance, like the classic brainstorming technique of like, hey, we're all going to get around and we're just going to shout out some ideas. It's one of the least effective ways to generate ideas for most teams. Not all teams, there's a few exceptions, but most teams don't have the skills to do that well. But there's a lot of other techniques they could use that would generate more ideas and better ideas. And so that's what I mean by just that lack of understanding or lack of knowledge can really impede the innovation or the creativity. And then the biggest ones that I hear from my clients is time. Like time, of course, time gets in the way of everything we want to do. And so I think going back to, what can you let go of? But I also think it doesn't have to be that time consuming.
Yeah.
Especially, spending 5 minutes generating ideas in a team, you could get a lot of ideas in just 5 minutes. Especially if you're not using the classic brainstorming approach.
Right. Okay, so you bring up brainstorming, and of course that's, Alex Osborne. So we know this. We're both creativity researchers, and I'm like, oh yeah, her bibliography is robust. Like she's got all the names. What do people get wrong about brainstorming? Why do they do it wrong? And how do you do it right?
Okay, so just a little history that I don't know if listeners would know.
No, probably not. Okay. So unpack it. Okay. Yeah, you and I are creativity geeks, so unpack that for us.
Yeah. Okay, so the concept of brainstorming came about in the 1940s. This guy, Alex Osborne, he was an ad guy, like a marketing guy, and he owned this firm called BBDO. The firm still exists today, and he was the O. He was Osborne. And he wrote this book called Your Creative Power. And in the book, there was this one chapter about the storming of the minds. And he explains how this works, where you get together, a group of people, you share a specific challenge or problem, and then people shout out ideas. And so since then, and of course this gets dubbed brainstorming, and since then there's been some research studies to say, does this actually work? Do people generate more ideas through this technique than if they were just sitting by themselves? So let's say you have a group of 10 people, a team, and you task them with a specific challenge to generate ideas for. And then you also take 10 people who are not on a team, give them the same challenge and tell them to each, individually come up with these ideas, and then you're going to lump them all together. And then you're comparing these two sets of ideas, which ones are better, the quantity, how many from each group, the quality of these ideas. There's a few metrics there. And what they found is that in most cases, the individuals come up with more ideas and better ideas when they're all lumped together. Now, here's the problem with that classic brainstorming technique. Most teams who are doing it have not been trained in these ideas of like the divergent thinking rules, which brainstorming is about divergent thinking. We're going to come up with whatever we come up with. We're not, trying to find the best answer. We're just trying to find lots of answers. And there's a set of rules that can make that go well, but most people that's not talked about. The other thing that happens in brainstorming is when ideas are verbally shared, whoever the first couple of ideas that are shared, the rest of the team sort of goes in that direction because they think, oh, that must be the right direction. So we need to kind of follow that lead. And that doesn't happen if everyone's individually generating ideas first. The other thing that can happen is sort of what's called social loafing, which is where, like, well, we got 10 people here. I'm just going to hang back. I don't need to give anything because plenty of people are already sharing. And that could be intentional. It could be accidental for whatever reason, but you're not maybe getting all 10 people's brains involved. And there's some other layers to it. But what's important here is a team could get really good at that classic brainstorming technique, but it means they're going to have really strong team dynamics. They're going to be very comfortable with each other. That have a high level of trust and psychological safety. They all understand how divergent thinking works. Right. So there's a lot of skill development that goes into it. If you know anything about the company IDEO, they are really good at this. Their job is to produce creative ideas and turn those into cool products, right? Yeah. They are good at brainstorming. That technique works really well for them. It probably won't work for, I don't know, the nurses team meeting or something where, you've got other excellent skills, but maybe aren't so trained, so skilled in this particular thing. Right.
And then when you get the power dynamics in the room, like if you have a senior executive throwing out ideas, then of course, a lower level person on the team may not want to speak up because, they're going against that power dynamic. Well, they have the best ideas. They're senior to me.
Gosh, exactly.
Gosh, you're right. There's so many layers to that. Great. Wow. Okay. So as a creativity person, what's an example of how you've applied creativity in your own business?
Okay. Many examples. One of them I'll share is I created this product that I think you know about, Heather, Climer cards.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And there's a Climer cards too now, isn't there? Okay.
There is.
Tell us about Climer cards.
Okay. So I created Climer cards back in 2012. Well, 2012 was when they kind of came out in the world. But what they are is a simple deck of cards. They look like the size and shape of a deck of playing cards. And the purpose of the deck is a tool to help groups move deeper into conversation. And so there's 52 images. And so there are all these different images. There's like these little drawings that I made. They're very simple. Yeah. Like a butterfly, a target, like concentric circles, an open door, an iron. There's all these different images. The way they work, you lay them out on the table, you ask a question, anything. It could be, say it's a staff meeting in a healthcare facility. Pick a card that represents how you think we did this week on patient care. And then everyone picks their card, whatever they have, and then you could go around and share, or maybe they pair up and share. But what happens is when people are using these images, they're creating metaphors, and when they're creating these metaphors, they end up going more specific and deeper than they would if you had just asked the question without the cards. You can imagine, you ask this question, your team meeting, how did we do this week on patient care? And, I thought we did pretty good. We had this one incident, maybe we could have fixed it, but, we did pretty well. Like, it's not a very in-depth conversation. Anyway, so these cards, the way they evolved, kind of followed the creative process, and that there was another deck of cards out there that still exist that I had used, but I didn't really like them because they were sort of like just 1990s clip art. And they were okay, but I had decided I'm going to make my own. So I, drew, I did these little watercolor drawings of all these cards. And then one day, and I was just using them for myself. Yeah. And at the time, I did a lot of team building. I worked on ropes courses or challenge courses. I worked at a bunch of different places. And
gosh, I love that.
Anyway, So one day I'm with this group, and it was a group of women in the trades. So people who were in school to become like carpenters or mechanics or whatever.
Cool.
So there's about 10 of them, and they came together for this day of team building to get to know each other better. And I give them this challenge to, some sort of problem solving activity. And it was horrible. Like they did it wasn't so much that they couldn't solve the problem, but just the dynamics, and they were like, kind of rude to each other, and just it didn't go well. So the activity is over, and I put these cards on the ground, and I said, pick a card that represents your behavior in this activity. And this one woman picked a card, and as she's talking, she starts crying and basically says, I didn't like how I behaved in this activity. I didn't like who I was. I didn't, and basically apologized to everybody for her behavior. Wow. And that sparked other people to be more reflective and more open. And it was amazing. So we finished this great conversation, and we're outside. So we walk over through a grassy area to another activity. And a good friend of mine, her name's Sarah. Sarah was like the leader of this group. And as we're walking, she's like, Amy, these cards you have are really cool. Have you ever thought of doing something with them? And I was like, what do you mean doing something with them?
I just did something with them.
Right. It never occurred to me to make these for other people, but that's just meant. So I did all this research, and I figured out, well, how do you manufacture something like this? And then I didn't have any money to get them manufactured, so I put them up on Kickstarter. This is in 2012, like barely anyone even knew what Kickstarter was. They got funded, and I was able to print 500 decks. And I thought, oh, this will just be a fun little project. I'm going to sell these 500 decks. And then, about deck 475, people are still buying them. It's like, oh, maybe I should order more?
Yeah.
Anyway, they're still being sold. They've been used in 58 countries around the world.
Every continent?
Every continent, even Antarctica.
I was like, how did that happen?
Yeah, my uncle lived there. I got a little picture of a penguin in the background.
I love it.
Yeah.
I have an affinity for penguins. I'll tell you more about that later.
True. That's funny.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so here we are 15 years later, and Climer cards are still going.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was I kind of had identified this problem. I clarified that I needed this thing for myself, so I made them. But then, and so I had all these ideas, and I put this together, and then the Kickstarter campaign was really pivotal, because I think a lot of times we have ideas that we think are good, but then that was the test. Does anyone else think this idea is any good? And it's like, well, if you think it's good, here's the buy button for you to pay for it, and anyway, and it was successful. But yeah, that whole process sort of followed that whole experience followed the creative process.
Yeah. So you're practicing what you preach.
Yeah, I'm trying.
You're following that. So real quickly, or take as much time as you wish, if a leader is listening to the podcast right now and they're listening to us talk about the Climer cards, how do they get a deck, and how do they use them?
Okay. Well, first you can buy a deck at climercards.com.
Okay.
And Climer is spelled Climer. So go to climercards.com. You can order however many decks you want. The way you use them is basically you think about, in a group setting, what do you want this group to talk about? And I have not come up with a topic yet that would not fit. So yeah, maybe Heather, throw in what do you think would be a topic that a team might want to talk about?
Maybe how to improve a process where they're stuck.
Okay. So you spread all the cards out on the table with the images face up. And then the phrase you say is select a card that represents how we can improve this process, XYZ process. Or select a card that represents how you think this process is going right now. And then that might spark some more conversation, because sometimes it can be helpful to look at what's the current situation before we jump into solutions. And And then, okay, so everyone has their card, and you can either, if it's a smaller group, I'd say under 10, well, maybe even bigger than that. Depends on what your goal here is. But often, if it's a smaller group, I'll just have everybody share, and just hold up their card and say, well, I picked the iron because da-da-da-da-da. And then, from there, you can go into more conversation after everybody has shared.
Yeah. So it's using the metaphor of here, the process feels like an iron to me right now. All it is steaming and we're not getting anywhere or whatever.
Or we need to just smooth out some wrinkles, but overall it's good, whatever. And what's interesting is that two people could have the same card and have completely different reasons for picking that card, which is really fun.
Yeah.
There's also a virtual version if you have a remote team where there's a web-based app that you don't even have to download anything. You just make an account, and it's really easy to use with a remote team.
Okay. So. Yeah, which is really common because some teams we're rarely co-located nowadays. Sometimes these teams are all over the world. And because you're using imagery and metaphor, it seems like there wouldn't even be any language barriers when using it as well. Like that's it. They make sense of it from their own perspective and their own culture.
Yeah, which I think is why they've been able to be used in 58 countries or 60 countries, whatever it is now. That was a goal that I had. Is I tried my best to select images that would work well cross-culturally, that weren't American centric. So and they're very simple, kind of iconic images. So yeah.
Brilliant. Of course you would do that. That's fantastic. Okay. All right, let's get back to deliberate creative teams. And one of the things that you emphasize, and I've heard you talk about it on the podcast right now, that creativity is a process. It's not a magical accident. It doesn't just happen. It's deliberate. And so I'd love to unpack that a little bit more about how we are deliberate with creativity, what role do leaders play, and how can teams be more creative? And I've just thrown some stuff out there. Where would you like to start?
Okay. Yeah, great question. I think, I could share. There's a model that I created through my dissertation research that I could share.
Okay, let's go there.
So, all right, I'm going to hold this up for those who are watching on the video. This is the model. It's on page 146. So this is the deliberate creative team system. And you'll see that there's a three-circle Venn diagram. So the three circles are team purpose, team dynamics, and team creative process. So team purpose, and these are basically the three things that if a team is to be effective at collaborative creativity and being innovative together, these are the three elements that they need in order to get there.
Okay.
So team purpose, what's our purpose? What are we doing? Why do we exist? Sometimes this is obvious, like the marketing team. Sometimes not so much. I've had executive teams not be able to explain their team purpose. And at the same time, most teams have this fairly well figured out.
Okay.
So team purpose, in some ways, it's the easiest one. Team purpose. The next one is team dynamics, which is the behaviors and interactions we have with each other. So how do we treat each other? How do we show up? It's kind of the culture of the team. Specifically, what's important here is our level of trust with each other, how well we communicate with each other, and our ability to engage in healthy conflict, a type of conflict called creative abrasion. Those are really important. And then the third circle, team creative process, this is, do all team members know and use a creative process? And this is the circle that most of my clients don't know. Most people have never heard of a creative process. They didn't even know there was one. So those are the three circles that I focus on a lot in the work. And those are the things that leaders need to focus on in their teams. Okay. And the reality is this is going to help your team whether you're trying to be creative or not. So it's worth the effort, to put into.
Yeah. So when you're with a team, do you sit down and identify these three circles and, get them working through their purpose and then articulate their dynamics so that you can get to the creative process? Is it linear like that, or how does it work?
That's the ideal. Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually have an assessment that I created as part of my dissertation that a team, like every team member responds to, and the results get aggregated and we can see where's the team now, point A, and then those results can help me figure out what do we need to focus on. I mean, there could be, sometimes there are teams that they're really strong in team dynamics. They love each other. They work really well together, but they aren't clear on their purpose. And so they end up sort of flailing a little bit. And so like, all right, cool. That helps us. More often it's the opposite, where their team dynamics need some work. But what I find is that a lot of times team dynamics can be improved by focusing on the process of how you work together. And so what are the structure of your team meetings? That would be part of your process. Are the team meetings always sort of set up so that we're just verbally sharing? There's nothing visual. I mean, there's all sorts of little nuances that you can change that improves dynamics. So they're very integrated, those bottom two. So that's, sorry.
No, I was thinking about Tuckman's stages of team development, norming, storming, forming, norming, storming, performing. How does that play into the team creativity process?
It totally plays into it. I mean, that's the dynamics. A team that's, in fact, this assessment that I created, a brand new team could not take it because the questions are about the behaviors within the teams. And so a brand new team would struggle we don't know what our behaviors if we just got together, right? So it's for teams kind of past that forming stage. But in that forming stage, that's a place of really rich opportunity, right, for a leader. And that you can really figure out, okay, what's the culture I want to create here? Yeah. And if you can set up a culture where you're building trust, you're building psychological safety right there from the beginning, I mean, that's amazing. Most leaders don't get that, unless they're just starting, everything's brand new in the company. Most of the time you're with a team that's already formed. And that's okay. That also has its other advantages. But that's where, I think assessing where are we on Tuckman's model, our stages of group development, and that I feel like this Venn diagram is really helping the team get to that performing level, that last stage, which is very rare for a team to get to that level.
Yeah. But gosh, when it's there, it's beautiful.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I've been on some of those teams, but you're right, it's rare, but it's fantastic when you get there.
Yeah, and it feels good as a team member. Your output is amazing. You're impacting other people. I mean, it's just like win, win, win all around,
Yeah, but it's deliberate. You've got to do it on purpose. It doesn't happen by accident. So how can teams be more deliberate? How can they innovate on demand? Can you talk us through that?
Sure. Yeah, there's actually also a bunch of activities in the book that I think are very helpful for leaders to lead with their teams. I do think that actually having the whole team read the book can be really helpful because everyone's then going to have that foundational understanding. And then I think it's really looking at that deliberate piece. I'm a big fan of focusing on team meetings because that is a big part of what makes a team, right? Even if you have just daily 5-minute stand-ups, what happens in that meeting? Is there can you bring in some opportunities for reflection? Can you, most teams are not having only 5-minute meetings. Right. Maybe they're, that's a rarity. I was thinking about a colleague of mine mostly works in healthcare, and that's something that she's been talking about, that some of them, especially in these senior centers where it's like 24/7, all they have time for is 5 minutes.
And you're right. There's stand-up meetings, they get together, huddle, and then go.
Right.
That's the way it happens.
But I do think, what's going on in the team meetings and how are you inviting innovation? So, for instance, a lot of times I have leaders come to me and say, I don't know how to get my team members to talk. In our team meetings, only 2 or 3 people ever say anything. Most of them are quiet. And I say, well, tell me a little bit about how you're structuring your meetings. And the meetings are mostly structured that the leader, the expert, is disseminating idea to the team members. And you've basically taught them that their job is to sit and listen. And what if that was shifted? What if instead you set up, you throw a question out to the group and you're like, oh, I'd love to hear from every single person. Let's go around and share. That's like, in some ways, forced interaction, but it's also, it's invitational, right? It's like, I'm not just going to wait for the people, just going to rely on the people that think fast and jump in and are really extroverted. Or what if the question you pose, you say, I would like everyone to take a few minutes and write down your thoughts, and then we'll share. Or, let's put our thoughts on Post-it notes or our responses, or let's generate some ideas. And in fact, going back to that brainstorming, let's, instead of verbally sharing, everybody has a little stack of Post-it notes. I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes. And in 3 minutes, write down as many ideas as you can on a Post-it note, 1 idea per note. Then let's start sharing them. And that, 3 minutes. Yeah. We're not talking about a lot of time. That alone would shift how the team meetings are. Now, the first time you do it, it might feel awkward. People are like, okay, what's going on here? But pretty soon you start doing that regularly and they're going to learn, oh, my input is valued. Yes. And that's going to just change everything.
Yeah. Okay, so you're bringing up so many questions for me. And you've... I'm kind of geeking out here.
This is awesome. I love geeking out about this stuff.
So one of the questions that I'm asking in my research right now, and you're speaking to it on so many levels, is what's the environment that either nurtures or hinders creativity? So what have you found in all your multiple decades of work now? What are the environmental, cultural milieu that can nurture creativity in teams, and what can absolutely hinder it or kill it?
I think one thing that's important is to understand the environment of the team is more important than the environment of the entire organization. At least that's what I found in my research. That if you think about like the process of a team, you've got the inputs of a team. Like, okay, we got a team of, 8 people. And so all 8 of them, like those inputs might be, their educational background, their previous experience, like the things that they're bringing in, even their personalities, their identity, they're bringing into the team. And then we have process. What's the process that the team works on and how they work together? And then there's the output. So the end result, right? And so if we just look at input and process, and we look at input and process both internal to the team and external to the team, what the research says is the most important for a team's ability to be creative is their internal process, which to me, that is really exciting because as a leader, I can influence that. Regardless of if I'm like a mid-level manager, I can influence that more than I can anything else in the organization, right? And certainly even as a CEO, I can influence that with my executive team, which then hopefully will have a nice trickle-down effect. But that, I don't know, that when I found that, pieced together all this literature and research, I was like, this is amazing. This is so exciting.
Yeah. And that has to speak to, like, there's several things going on there. There's psychological safety, there's creative self-efficacy, and how the environment that a leader can nurture for their team matters even more than the large organization itself. Like, what is that small microcosm on the team that allows them to be creative?
Yeah,
Gosh,
absolutely.
That's brilliant. Okay. What's the flip side of that? What kills creativity on teams? That's a strong word. What hinders?
No, you can use the word kill. I was just laughing. There's a story, I'm pretty sure it's in the book. And I was on this team years ago, early in my career, and it was a great team. It was a really solid team. It was at a university. And our team meetings were, very much like a lot of input, and we were grappling with, various problems, and it was great. I love this group. And one day, the dean comes to our meeting, and he says, I'm here today because I'd really like to get your input on this new initiative we're going to roll out. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, yeah, I want to get some ideas from you all and maybe do a little brainstorming. And, I like just perk up. I'm like, oh, this sounds fun. What are we going to do? And so I got my pencil, my pen ready, and he, starts laying out the situation. He's explaining what's going on. And after about 15 minutes of him talking, I start looking around at my colleagues and I catch the eye of a friend of mine. And I was like, what's going on? Why is he still talking? And we just had the same look on our face, and I had to work really hard not to bust out laughing. But he then continued with his monologue for 55 minutes. At the end of 55 minutes, he said, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all's input. This was very helpful. Bye. I was like, I don't even know if he realized what he was doing.
He didn't want your ideas. He wanted to share his.
There was no ideas. He shared. There was nothing else but I was like, all right, I'm glad we could be a therapy session for you. But I think that sort of thing hinders creativity where there's leaders who say they want ideas and then what they do is the complete opposite. And I think having alignment, like you say you want ideas, show it. Show me you want ideas by how you set up this meeting. What do you do when ideas are shared? Not saying you need to accept every idea because we all know not every idea is a good one, and that's okay. There's a different process for evaluating them, but that's what I see a lot is that the leaders create an environment, usually unintentionally, where they're suppressing ideas before they even come up.
Yeah, they're just getting in their own way and not, as you say, he probably didn't even realize what he was doing. Gosh.
I mean, I hope he didn't, because if he had made that comment at the end and realized, now I'm really worried.
Yeah, seriously. What? Yeah, not good as a leader. Well, I'm curious. Just one last question before we move on to because Percy's tugging over here at me saying he wants to come ask you some questions. So my research assistant is really anxious to get into this conversation. Yeah, but if you were to wrap this up for a leader who's listening and they're like, I know I need to be more creative. I know I need to set the stage for my team. We've got big problems to solve. What would you say to them to encourage them to get started? How do they get going at this?
I mean, this may sound a little self-serving, but I want to say, read the book. The book.
Buy the book.
Yes, buy the book, Deliberate Creative Teams. I packed it in here in everything I could think of that you would need. And, you're probably like me, Heather, that you know a lot of people who've written books. And some of them are good, and some of them maybe not so much. But I've had a lot of friends who have come to me and said, Amy, your book's really
good. Amy, it's really good.
So I was like, okay, I appreciate that. They know they wouldn't say that if they didn't mean it.
Yeah.
But I do think it is a pretty easy read.
It is. It's accessible.
Yeah. But I think that just digging in, understanding how creativity works can be really helpful. And then talking about it with your team and finding out and just talking about process first versus jumping right into we got to solve this problem. Just spend some time talking about how do we want to be creative together and what's the process we're going to use. And I've laid one out for you in the book. You don't have to use that one exactly, but it's there if you want it. But I think that can be really helpful, is to focus a bit on process.
Yeah. I love that. And I completely agree with your friends. I think the book is good. It is sound, it's solid, it's accessible. The processes are easy to follow. I love your stories. I can't believe you actually interviewed Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And I was like, wait, what? How did that happen? So those of you listening to the podcast, go get your copy, and I will put a link to Climer cards and to the book in the episode notes. But Dr. Amy, before I let you go, my research assistant, Percy, the I'm in penguin, he has a couple of questions for you. Percy, hi. I know you're right there. Come on, Percy, come on over. Great. Thank you, Percy, for these questions. Dr. Amy, Percy's first question comes to you from a previous guest, David Hutchins, and he asks, what are we talking about when we talk about humanized leadership? What does that mean to you? And why is it important to bring humanity to our leadership and to our business?
I love this question. The last chapter of my book is called For Humanity. And, but I think humanized leadership is, it sounds so cliche, but it's like where we put people first, but we really are focusing on the people and that we are humans and we have feelings and ideas and thoughts and we're complex beings and we're quirky and awkward and weird and not so good. That's like what's making us unique. That's why we have a team, right? We want all of that quirkiness and all of those uniqueness together because that's when really cool things happen. And that to me is what, humanized leadership is, where we embrace that, we welcome it, we honor it. I do think that, some of the old leadership philosophies of the 50s and 60s are we've learned, maybe they worked then for some reason, but there's so much more effective approaches now to be more, collaborative and kind. I was just pondering on this question recently of what would happen, or how would life be different if we were always kind to each other? That so often when I think of times when I haven't been kind, it didn't really serve me and it was unnecessary. I can't really think of a situation where that was needed. Maybe it's not 100% of the time needed, but you know what I mean? It's I feel like often we just, we could be more kind. I'll just put it that way.
And I agree with you. The times when I've been unkind, I just feel icky and awful and ashamed afterwards. That wasn't necessary.
Totally.
Yeah. So bringing that humanness to our interactions. And I love that question was asked you because your last chapter is all about that and contributing to humanity. And Dr. Amy Climer, you have contributed to humanity. So thank you for your work. Okay, Percy's second question is, he would like to know what question you would like to ask a future guest.
Well, maybe since we were just talking about kindness, maybe something like what is the connection you see between creativity and kindness, and how can we infuse both of those more in our world?
I love that. That's good. That's good. My next guest is going to have a lot of fun with that question.
Oh, good.
So thank you. Well, Dr. Amy Climer, thank you for sharing your insights, your deliberate creative strategies with us today. Can you tell us one more time, where can our listeners find you and get their copy of Climer Cards and the Deliberate Creative Teams?
Sure. Yeah, so my website is climerconsulting.com, and Climer is spelled Climer. You can find the book there, and Climer Cards you can find at climercards.com. You can also find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble website, anywhere books are sold, you can find the book or they can get it for you. So yeah, I hope you'll check it out.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to our listeners for joining us in this conversation. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone else who could use a dose of inspiration and creativity. And please leave us a review. I read every single one. They are so precious. So until next time, keep saying I'm in to creativity, bold thinking, transformational growth, and meaningful conversations. May you be wildly creative in your life and leadership. I'll see you soon.